Twasuetiman. They thought he was just a stranger crying at a grave, until the three little girls called him Daddy, and everything changed. Jonathan Blake was only 28, yet his name already echoed in the corridors of power and technology across Manhattan. He wasn't just a millionaire. He was the youngest CEO on the Forbes list, the mastermind behind a revolutionary AI security platform, and a man whose ambition had consumed every inch of his life since his early 20s. His days were a whirlwind of meetings, press appearances, and investment rounds. Success followed him like a shadow. But for all his power, there were things Jonathan couldn't control, especially the ghosts of his past. He sat alone in the back of his black SUV as it cruised through Central Park South, the skyline gleaming against a pale spring sky. His assistant rattled off his schedule through the Bluetooth speaker, board calls, interviews, and evening gala. He barely listened. His mind had drifted since breakfast. Earlier that morning, over a quick meeting with an investor he hadn't seen in years, Jonathan had been blindsided by a name he hadn't heard since college. Elizabeth Moore, the man had said casually. She passed away 6 months ago. Can you believe it? It hit him like ice water to the chest. He hadn't even known she was gone. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Elizabeth. She was his first real love. His only real love, if he were being honest. They'd met at Stanford during their sophomore year. He was the shy tech nerd on a scholarship. She was the brilliant architecture student who brought light into every room she entered. They had fallen fast like fire meeting gasoline. Late nights building dreams, mornings wrapped in sunlight and tangled sheets, long walks on campus whispering about the life they would someday build together. But it had ended, abruptly. She had vanished from his life not long before graduation. No phone call, no letter, no email, just gone. He told himself she'd moved on, maybe fallen in love with someone else. He buried the confusion and pain in his startup, working 18-hour days to escape the hollow ache in his chest. Now, 6 months after her death, he realized just how deep the wound still was. He had never healed. He had just outpaced the pain. That afternoon, he canceled everything on his calendar, ignored the protests from his PR team and personal assistant, booked a one-way ticket to Boston. He didn't know what he was looking for. Closure, maybe, or a reason for the silent years, or just to stand at her grave and say goodbye properly, the way he never had a chance to. The next morning, under overcast skies and a cold breeze that bit through his coat, Jonathan found himself standing at the gates of a quiet cemetery on the edge of a small Massachusetts town. He had never been here before. The place was peaceful, surrounded by maple trees still bare from winter, a stone wall enclosing it like an old secret. He walked slowly between the rows, his hand trembling around the white rose he held. Eventually he found the name, Elizabeth Marie Moore. The stone was simple, elegant, just like her. Beloved daughter, cherished mother. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Mother? He whispered aloud. His heart thundered. He hadn't known. She had a child? Or children? As he stood there stunned, trying to absorb the words carved into stone, he didn't notice the soft footsteps approaching. Only when he heard the rustle of fabric did he turn, and froze. 3 little girls stood a few feet behind him. They looked to be about 7, identical. Red hair, emerald green eyes, all 3 dressed in matching pink dresses. They were holding hands, staring at him with silent curiosity. Behind them came an older woman, with gray in her hair and a tired but kind expression. She stopped when she saw him. Her eyes widened slightly. She knew him. Mrs. Moore? He said softly. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan. And in that instant, without her needing to say a word more, he knew. The girls. They weren't just Elizabeth's daughters. They were his. The moment Jonathan realized the truth, the air seemed to collapse around him. The weight of it pressed down on his chest, tighter with every breath. He stood frozen, staring at the 3 little girls, his daughters, trying to process what had just unraveled in front of him. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. They were still looking at him with innocent curiosity, unaware of the storm that raged inside the man standing by their mother's grave. The woman, Elizabeth's mother, Martha Moore, stepped forward slowly, her gaze cautious but not unkind. Come, she said softly, motioning toward a nearby bench under a bare oak tree. We should talk. Jonathan followed, almost in a daze. The girls trailed behind, whispering to one another in that secret language only siblings seem to understand. They sat on the grass nearby, drawing in the dirt with sticks and humming a song he didn't recognize. Their laughter floated through the quiet cemetery, oblivious to the emotional earthquake their presence had triggered. When he sat down on the bench, his hand was still clutching the white rose. It was trembling slightly. "You didn't know," Martha said gently, watching him. "I can see it on your face." Jonathan shook his head, barely able to speak. "No, I didn't. She never told me. Never contacted me. I—" His voice cracked, and he paused, struggling to contain 1,000 questions. "She wanted to," Martha said, folding her hands in her lap. "Believe me, Jonathan, she wrote the letters. So many. I saw them. But she never sent them." "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "She was scared," Martha answered. "Scared you'd moved on. Scared it would hurt your future. She knew about your company, your rise. You were everywhere. News articles, interviews. She watched every step you took." Jonathan looked down at the rose in his hand, gripping it so hard the stem nearly snapped. "And when she found out she was pregnant," Martha continued, her voice heavier now, "she decided to raise them alone. She didn't want to burden you, not with your world moving at 100 miles an hour. And then when the doctor said there were 3 of them, triplets, it was overwhelming. She thought you'd think she was trying to trap you or take your money. She didn't want that." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "But it wasn't her choice to make. I had a right to know. I would have been there." "I know," Martha said. "I told her the same. But by the time she thought maybe she could reach out, her cancer had already spread. She was so sick, Jonathan. Those last months were cruel, fast. She didn't even look like herself by the end." Silence fell between them, broken only by the giggling of the girls in the background. "They look just like her," Jonathan said finally, his voice quiet. "But they have my eyes." Martha smiled softly. "Yes, they do. And your stubbornness. Ruby's the ringleader. Lily's the dreamer. And Scarlett, well, she'll negotiate world peace someday." Jonathan tried to laugh, but it came out more like a broken sigh. "What do they know? About me?" "Nothing," Martha replied. "Only that their mommy is in heaven, and that I'm taking care of them now. They don't know about you. Not yet." Jonathan nodded slowly, his heart sinking and soaring all at once. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not ready for this." "No one ever is," she said, placing a hand on his. "But they deserve to know you, and you deserve to know them." At that moment, the girls came skipping over, Scarlett holding a small drawing in her hand, a stick figure family drawn in pink crayon. "Look," she said, holding it up proudly. "This is us. And this," she added, pointing to the tallest figure with brown scribbled hair, "is our mystery prince." Jonathan's breath hitched. He looked down at the picture, and for the first time in years, his eyes welled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "Can I be your prince?" he asked gently. The girls looked at each other, confused but amused. Ruby grinned. "Only if you bring cookies next time." "I can do that," he whispered. Martha smiled. "Come back tomorrow. Stay for dinner. Let them get used to you." "I will," Jonathan said, standing slowly. He looked back at the grave one last time. "I promise." And as he walked back to his car, the world looked different. It wasn't just about billion-dollar valuations or product launches anymore. It was about 3 little girls in pink dresses who had no idea they had just changed a man's life forever. The next day, Jonathan returned to the quiet suburban house on the outskirts of Boston, gripping a paper bag filled with chocolate chip cookies from the city's most famous bakery. It felt absurd. This man who once negotiated billion-dollar contracts was now nervously clutching dessert, wondering what to say to 3 little girls who unknowingly carried his blood in their veins. The house was modest, 2 stories with a weathered porch and a wind chime that sang a soft song in the breeze. There were chalk drawings on the walkway, flowers, stars, and a sprawling attempt at a unicorn that took up half the driveway. He could feel the pulse of childhood in the air, a warm, chaotic energy he hadn't experienced in decades. Martha opened the door with a smile and stepped aside. "You're right on time. They've been asking when the cookie man is coming back." Jonathan smiled tightly, unsure whether he was grateful or terrified. "That's me now, I guess." He stepped into the house. It smelled of vanilla and something floral, maybe laundry detergent. The walls were covered with framed pictures of Elizabeth, younger and older, and of the girls in all their stages of toddlerhood. Jonathan's eyes lingered on a photo of Elizabeth holding all three babies in her arms, tired but beaming. A knife twisted in his heart. The girls rushed down the stairs, each one barefoot, their hair in messy pigtails and their eyes sparkling with excitement. "He brought cookies!" Ruby yelled. Lily clapped her hands. "Are there sprinkles?" "Just chocolate chips," Jonathan said, holding out the bag like an offering to royalty. "But the good kind, from New York." "New York cookies?" Scarlett asked, eyes wide. "Are those different?" "They're busier," Jonathan replied with a smile. "Like the city." They tore into the bag and settled around the living room coffee table, crumbs flying within minutes. Martha brought in juice boxes and sat quietly on the recliner, watching the scene unfold without interrupting. Jonathan sat on the carpet, awkward in his designer slacks, but unwilling to distance himself from the girls. "So," he asked, "can you tell me about yourselves?" The answers came fast, overlapping and chaotic. "I like robots," said Ruby. "I want to be a mermaid," Lily chimed in. "Do you have a dog?" Scarlett asked, climbing onto the arm of the couch like it was a jungle gym. "Because I want a dog." "I don't," Jonathan said, amused. "But I've thought about getting one." "Get a big one," Ruby insisted, "and name him Sandwich." Lily tilted her head. "What's your job?" Jonathan hesitated. "I run a company. We build things that help keep people safe." "Like a superhero?" she asked seriously. He smiled. "Something like that." They spent an hour asking questions. Did he have a car? Did he like pizza? What was his favorite color? Did he like to sing? Scarlett made him perform "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" in a shaky falsetto that made all three collapse in laughter. Every minute chipped away at his fear, and underneath it, something else began to grow, something fierce and unfamiliar. Love. Not the romantic kind he once knew with Elizabeth. This was different, deeper, protective, raw. He looked at their faces and saw her in them, in Ruby's fierce stare, in Lily's dreamy voice, in Scarlett's sudden mischief. They were his, and he had missed 7 years. After the girls were tucked in for their afternoon nap, Martha brewed tea in the kitchen. Jonathan sat at the small breakfast table, looking out at the backyard where 3 swings swayed in the wind. "They're amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They are," Martha agreed, pouring his cup. "And they need you, whether they know it or not." "I don't know how to be a father." "No one does at first," she said. "You'll learn. You already started." Jonathan nodded, lost in thought. "I want to be part of their lives, not just a visitor with cookies. I want to help raise them." Martha looked at him carefully. "That won't be easy. There are routines, schools, doctors, legal things, but more than that, they'll need consistency, someone who doesn't leave." "I don't want to leave," he said. "Not again. Not ever." A long silence passed between them. "I'll support you," Martha said finally. "Elizabeth would have wanted them to know you. She just didn't know how." Jonathan looked down at his tea, the reflection of the light rippling across its surface. "I wish she'd told me. I would have dropped everything." "I know. And now you don't have to wish anymore. Now you just have to show up." He nodded slowly. "I will." That night before he left, he peeked into the girls' room. They were curled up in a tangle of blankets, their cheeks flushed with sleep. Scarlett was holding the drawing of the stick figure family in one hand. Ruby had chocolate on her chin. Lily mumbled something about sandwiches in her dream. Jonathan closed the door softly, his heart both full and aching. He had found them too late for their first words, their first steps, their first birthdays. But he would not miss another moment. Not if he could help it. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a life Jonathan never imagined he'd be living. Every Friday, without fail, he flew from New York to Boston, spent the weekends with the girls and Martha, and then returned early Monday morning before the city even stirred. His team at the company began to notice his shifts, shorter hours, fewer red-eye meetings, a softer look in his eyes. He was still brilliant, still sharp, but something had changed. He had changed. The girls welcomed him every time with explosive excitement. They ran to the door when they heard his knock, tackled him with hugs, and insisted he read their favorite books in different voices. Scarlett demanded pirates, Ruby preferred robots, and Lily, for some inexplicable reason, liked it best when he read. Like a British grandmother, Jonathan embraced it all. He let them braid his hair with ribbons, wore glitter crowns during imaginary tea parties, and cheered louder than anyone when they showed off handstands in the yard. Slowly, he became more than just a visiting presence. He became dad. Still, there were challenges. One Saturday morning, a week after Scarlett broke her pinky toe, while trying to fly off the coffee table with a makeshift cape, Jonathan sat in the kitchen with Martha, paperwork spread across the table. Legal forms, custody documents, consent declarations. The girls hadn't just claimed a piece of his heart, they had upended his life, and he was ready to rebuild it around them. "I want to bring them home," he said. "To New York." Martha across from him stirred her coffee. "They've never known anything else but this house, this town." "I know, and I wouldn't force it. I want to ease them into it. Get them comfortable first. Maybe a few weekends in the city. A trial summer." Martha looked at him carefully. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." That weekend, the girls got their first taste of Manhattan. Jonathan flew them in on a private jet, though he made it look like just a normal plane ride to avoid overwhelming them. The apartment he had prepared for their visit wasn't in the glossy, sterile tower he normally lived in, but a newly furnished brownstone on a quiet street with a garden and space to run. Their reactions were everything. "Is this a hotel?" Ruby asked as she stepped into the wide foyer, her backpack falling off her shoulder. "Nope," Jonathan said. "It's our house, at least for now. What do you think?" "It smells fancy," Lily announced, sniffing dramatically, "like candles and new books." "There's a swing in the backyard," Scarlett shrieked. "And a tree!" Jonathan watched them bounce from room to room, hearts wide open, and felt something click into place. Not just as a father, but as a man finally coming home to the version of himself he never knew he was missing. That night he made mac and cheese, burned it slightly, but they ate it anyway. They built a fort out of sofa cushions and fairy lights. He read them bedtime stories until all three fell asleep on top of him like puppies, and he didn't dare move for hours. But parenting wasn't all laughter and late-night cuddles. On their second weekend in New York, Ruby woke up in the middle of the night, crying for her mother. It was the kind of cry that shattered silence, a raw, heart-wrenched sound that no amount of money or success could fix. Jonathan rushed in and found her curled into a ball, tears soaking her pillow. "She's gone," Ruby sobbed, "and she didn't even say goodbye." Jonathan sat beside her, pulling her gently into his lap, his own throat tight. "I know, sweetheart," he said softly. "I miss her too." "Why didn't you come sooner?" she whispered. And there it was, the question that haunted him. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "I didn't know you existed. If I had—" His voice broke. "If I had known, I would have been there the second you were born." Ruby looked up at him through damp lashes. "Promise?" "I promise." She hugged him tighter, and after a while she fell asleep against his chest. Later, sitting alone in the quiet of the nursery, Jonathan allowed himself to cry. Not just for Elizabeth, or for the years he had lost, but for the man he used to be. The man who thought love was optional, who had believed that achievement was the ultimate purpose. Now he knew better. This, fatherhood, messy and hard and beautiful, was the real work of his life, and he would show up for it every day. As spring gave way to early summer, the rhythm of Jonathan's life began to change in ways even he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a weekend routine, visiting the girls in Boston, had turned into long stretches of days that blurred together with bedtime songs, scraped knees, spelling homework, and butterfly kisses. His sleek New York apartment remained empty more often than not, and truthfully, he didn't miss it. The brownstone he had furnished for them in Manhattan had started to feel like a real home. The fridge was no longer a cold showroom of sparkling water and takeout containers. It was now filled with grape juice, leftover macaroni, and a suspicious number of half-eaten yogurt tubes. The once pristine couch had a juice stain shaped vaguely like Texas, and the walls were slowly being overtaken by construction paper artwork signed in colorful crayon. Love Ruby. Love Lily. Love Scarlett. Jonathan didn't just allow it, he cherished it. But everything became real when the paperwork arrived. One Thursday afternoon, he came home to find a manila envelope sitting on the kitchen counter. Martha had placed it there with a note. "Let's make this official." Inside were the initial documents to begin the full custody transition. Jonathan held the papers for a long time before opening them. It wasn't doubt, It was gravity. Signing his name meant becoming their legal guardian, their everything. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't nervous about responsibility. He was nervous that he wouldn't be enough. Later that night, while the girls were brushing their teeth and arguing over whose turn it was to choose the bedtime book, he stood at the dining table with a pen in his hand. His heart pounded as if he were signing the biggest deal of his career. And maybe in a way he was. He wrote his name, not as CEO, not as shareholder, not as executive, just as dad. The next morning, the girls had a half day at school, and Jonathan took the opportunity to spend it fully with them. They had lunch at a quiet park cafe near the river, and then he took them to the planetarium. It had been a last-minute idea, but the moment they walked into the dome projection room, the girls gasped in unison. The lights dimmed, stars exploded onto the ceiling, and Jonathan sat in the middle seat with a child tucked on either side. Lily curled in his lap. He looked up at the simulated night sky, thinking how strange it was that so much wonder could exist in one room. His thoughts drifted to Elizabeth. She would have loved this. He could almost see her in the dark, sitting beside them, laughing softly at Scarlett's endless questions. After the show, Ruby tugged at his sleeve. "Do you think Mommy can see us?" she asked. Jonathan bent down. "I do," he said. "I think she sees everything, especially you three, and I think she's really proud of you." "She'd be proud of you too," Lily added thoughtfully, her blue eyes shining. He swallowed hard and hugged them both. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." Back at the brownstone, the girls wanted to draw pictures of their trip to the planetarium. Scarlett drew a comet crashing into a dinosaur. "For science," she said. Ruby made a rocket ship shaped suspiciously like a shoe. Lily's was the simplest. A family of 4 holding hands under a night sky, the stars forming a heart overhead. Jonathan watched her color in the stars with gold glitter gel pen. She looked up at him and said, without hesitation, "I'm glad you're our dad now." He knelt beside her. "I'm glad too, Lily. I really, really am." That night, after stories and lullabies and 3 separate bathroom breaks, he sat at the foot of their shared bed and watched them sleep. He thought about how different his life had become in just a few months. Not long ago, he had been a man living in penthouses, sipping black coffee through sleepless nights, with no one waiting for him to come home. Now he had 3 reasons to slow down, to grow up, to stay. And though he had made a fortune building algorithms and security systems, nothing in the world felt safer than this moment, surrounded by tiny hearts that beat alongside his. He didn't just belong here, he was home. One rainy afternoon in late June, Jonathan found himself deep inside an old cedar chest in the corner of the girls' playroom. The rain tapped steadily against the windows while the girls were at school, and for the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. Martha had gone out to run errands, leaving him alone in the place that had quickly become more than just a house. It was now a memory box in motion, full of color, noise, and new beginnings. The cedar chest had once belonged to Elizabeth. Martha had moved it from Boston after the girls transitioned fully to New York. It had remained unopened, pushed aside out of quiet reverence, or maybe fear. But today, something pulled Jonathan toward it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the weight of all the unanswered questions that still lingered like dust in forgotten corners. He lifted the lid slowly, and a faint scent of lavender and old paper drifted out. Inside were stacks of notebooks, photo albums, a tiny pair of baby shoes, and a bundle of letters wrapped in a silk ribbon the color of sunrise. With trembling hands, Jonathan untied the ribbon and picked up the top envelope. His name was written on it, in Elizabeth's handwriting. The breath caught in his throat. His hands gripped the paper as if it might vanish, as if this one small piece of her could dissolve in the light. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the letter. "Jonathan, if you're reading this, I guess life did what life does. It twisted, it turned. It took something from us and maybe gave us something back. I'm not even sure you'll ever see these words, but writing them feels like holding on to a truth I can't speak aloud. Yes, they're yours. Ruby, Lily, Scarlett, all yours. I was scared, Jonathan, not of you, never of you. I was scared of your world, of being just a footnote in the story of a man who was always meant for more. You were always going somewhere bigger, faster. I didn't want to hold you back, but I should have trusted you. They deserve to know you, and you deserve them. If somehow fate brought you back to them, Love them, Jonathan. Not like an obligation, like a miracle, because that's what they are. Every day with them is firelight in winter. Forgive me for not being braver. Sakuneshana to Elizabeth. He read the letter again and again, the edges of the paper growing soft in his grip. Tears fell freely now, quiet but heavy. He pressed the page to his chest and closed his eyes, his heart thudding with grief and gratitude in equal measure. Later that evening, the girls burst through the door soaking wet, shrieking with laughter after jumping in puddles. Jonathan met them at the hallway with towels and warm cocoa, his chest still aching from what he'd read. They noticed the change in him immediately, the softness in his gaze, the way he lingered with every hug a little longer. After dinner, as the storm still rolled across the city, Jonathan gathered the girls around the living room couch. "I want to show you something," he said. He brought out a photo album from the cedar chest. Its leather corners were worn, its pages slightly curled with time. The girls leaned in close, curious. Inside were photos of Elizabeth, young, vibrant, laughing on a beach, painting in a sunlit room, holding 3 red-faced newborns in a hospital bed. "She was so beautiful," Lily whispered. Jonathan nodded. "She was." "Is that you?" Ruby asked, pointing to a picture from college. Jonathan and Elizabeth sitting under a tree, heads together, eyes crinkled in laughter. "That's me," he said quietly. "We were just about your age when we first met." "That's not true," Scarlett giggled. "You're old." He laughed, wiping at his eyes. "I guess I am." They flipped through the pages together, telling stories, guessing which baby was which. Each photo unearthed a new connection. Each memory brought Elizabeth back into the room, if only for a flicker. When it was time for bed, Jonathan tucked them in one by one. Before turning off the light, Lily sat up and asked, "Will you tell us something about Mommy every night?" He paused, then smiled. "I will, every night." And he did. Each evening, as the city hummed outside and the brownstone settled into silence, he told them stories. About how Elizabeth once painted a whole wall in her apartment to look like the ocean. About how she hated mushrooms but pretended to love them on their first date. About how she always danced barefoot in the rain. In telling those stories, he gave them their mother back in pieces, not just as someone lost, but as someone loved, as someone alive in their laughter, in their stubbornness, in their dreams. And in that, Jonathan found healing too, because in the end, he realized that love doesn't disappear. It roots itself in the people we leave behind. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it finds its way home. As July rolled into August, Jonathan began to understand that parenthood wasn't a single transformation, but a series of small awakenings. It was in the way he instinctively reached for 3 juice boxes instead of 1, how he kept Band-Aids in every pocket, and how his heart now lived in triplicate, 1 piece for each girl. But with love came questions, and as the girls grew more comfortable in their new life, they also grew more curious. It started one lazy Sunday afternoon. They were sprawled on the living room floor in matching pajamas, playing a board game that had long lost its original rules. Jonathan sat in the armchair, watching them with a half-smile, his laptop open beside him, though long forgotten. Scarlett suddenly looked up from the pile of cards. "Daddy?" It still startled him sometimes, the way that word wrapped around his name like a new skin. "Yes, Bug?" "Did Mommy know you before we were born?" Jonathan sat up straighter. Ruby looked up too. Lily stopped mid-roll of the dice. "Yes," he said carefully. "I knew your mom when we were very young, before any of you were born. We met in college." "Like school, but for grown-ups?" Ruby asked. "Exactly." "Were you in love?" Lily asked, blinking innocently. Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I loved her very much." "Did she love you back?" Scarlett asked, her voice a little softer now. He swallowed hard. "She did." "Then why didn't we all live together?" Lily's question was quiet, too wise for 7 years old. Jonathan took a long breath and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Sometimes, even when 2 people love each other, life pulls them apart. Your mommy and I lost touch. She didn't tell me she was going to have you. I didn't know you existed until this year." "You didn't know about us?" Ruby asked. "Not even a little?" He shook his head gently. "No, but if I had, I would have come running. I would have been there the whole time." Scarlett's brows furrowed. Why didn't Mommy tell you? That's a question I've asked myself a lot, Jonathan said. I think she was scared. Not of me, but of what it might mean. I think she was trying to protect you. And maybe she wasn't ready to open that door again. The room was quiet for a while, the weight of grown-up reality settling over small shoulders. Then Ruby climbed into his lap without a word. Lily followed, hugging his arm. Scarlett stood for a second longer, then crawled into the crook of his other side. Jonathan wrapped them in his arms, breathing in the scent of their hair, their warmth. "We're glad you found us," Ruby mumbled. "Me too," he said, voice catching. "Yeah, more than anything." That night, after they were tucked in and the house had gone still, Jonathan found himself unable to sleep. He stood at the window in the girls' room, staring at the lights of the city, wondering how different everything could have been. He thought about all he'd missed. Their first words, their first steps, their first birthdays. And yet, he reminded himself, he hadn't missed everything. He was here now, and they were giving him the chance to earn a lifetime of firsts all over again. In the following days, the girls started asking more questions. Not just about their mother, but about where they came from, about how they were born, about why they looked like triplets. Jonathan brought in a child therapist, a warm, curly-haired woman named Dr. Maxine, who helped them talk through their feelings in a safe way. She gave them words for grief, for confusion, for joy. And she gave Jonathan something too, reassurance. "You're doing right by them," she told him after one session. "The truth, even when it's hard, is always a gift, especially when it's given with love." He carried that advice like a compass. When Lily asked if her mommy had been scared when she was sick, Jonathan told her yes, but also brave. When Scarlett asked if her mom was watching from the stars, he said, "Every night." And when Ruby asked if he would ever leave them, Jonathan looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Never. Not ever." The truth continued to bloom between them like a garden, watered with honesty, lit by trust. Toward the end of the month, they visited Elizabeth's grave together for the first time as a family. The girls each brought something small. Lily a drawing, Scarlett a rock she had painted, Ruby a locket with a tiny picture of all four of them. They laid their offerings gently at the headstone. Jonathan stood behind them, hands in his pockets, the sunlight casting golden stripes through the trees. He didn't cry this time. Not because he wasn't sad, but because for the first time sadness wasn't the only thing he felt. He also felt peace. As they left the cemetery, Scarlett reached up and grabbed his hand. "Mommy would have liked you." Jonathan squeezed her tiny fingers. "I like to think she did." He looked back one last time, the headstone now surrounded by tokens of love and memory. And he knew healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about building something new from what was lost. And in the laughter of three girls skipping ahead of him, he was already halfway there. Autumn arrived in New York with a hush of golden leaves and a cool breeze that seemed to sweep through every corner of the brownstone. For the first time in years, Jonathan noticed the change in seasons, not just through the window of a corporate jet or behind tinted glass in a boardroom, but through the delighted squeals of his daughters as they jumped into piles of leaves in the backyard, their laughter echoing against the brick walls like music. The summer had changed all of them. The transition to living together full-time had been messy, imperfect, and miraculous. There were tantrums and spilled juice and broken crayons. But there was also progress. The girls had started second grade in the city, and Jonathan had rearranged his entire company structure to work from home most days. His name still appeared in Forbes, still flashed across news tickers, but now it came second to a new title that mattered far more. Dad. They called him that easily now, without hesitation. Sometimes he still caught his breath when he heard it. 3 little syllables that shattered everything he used to think success meant. One Sunday morning, Jonathan woke to the smell of pancakes and the faint hum of off-key singing. Padding barefoot into the kitchen, he found the girls huddled around a pan, Martha supervising from the kitchen island with a coffee mug in hand. "You're not supposed to be up yet," Ruby announced, hands on her hips. "Why not?" he asked, pretending to be suspicious. "Because we're making you a surprise," Lily said, holding up a pancake shaped vaguely like a heart. Scarlett grinned. "It's Dad Day," Jonathan blinked. "I thought that was called Father's Day." "It is," Martha said with a smile. "But they made up a new one, just for you." His heart squeezed. He walked over and kissed the tops of their heads one by one. Best holiday I've ever heard of. They ate breakfast on the floor of the living room, surrounded by glittery construction paper cards that read, "We love you," and "901 Dad" in shaky handwriting. Scarlett handed him a lopsided ceramic mug they'd painted at school. It read Jonath because they'd run out of room. He used it every morning after that. Later that week, something even bigger happened. A court date, finalization. The girls didn't understand all the legalities, but Jonathan did. The months of paperwork, interviews, home studies, and evaluations had led to this, the day when he would officially, legally, forever become their father. They dressed up for the occasion. Ruby in her favorite red dress, Lily in a lavender sweater. Scarlett insisted on wearing a cape. Jonathan wore a navy blue suit, his tie clumsily tied by Lily's tiny hands. The courtroom was small and plain, but to Jonathan it felt sacred. The judge, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, looked at the family before her and smiled. "You understand the responsibility you're taking on?" she asked gently. "I do," Jonathan replied, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You understand that this isn't temporary? That this is forever? I wouldn't want it any other way." The judge glanced at the girls. "And do you three approve of this arrangement?" Ruby gave a solemn nod. Lily grinned and gave a thumbs up. Scarlett shouted, "He makes the best mac and cheese ever!" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel once and said, "Then it's official. Jonathan Blake, you are now, in every way the law recognizes, the legal father of Ruby, Lily, and Scarlett Moore." Jonathan didn't cry. He wept, right there in the courtroom, in front of strangers and friends and the entire beating heart of his world. He broke down, not from grief this time, but from joy too big to hold inside. The girls rushed to him, wrapping their arms around his waist, and he knelt to pull them close, burying his face in their hair. Later, as they walked out into the bright sunlight, Martha pulled him aside. "She would be proud," she said. Jonathan nodded, blinking up at the sky. "I hope she knows." That night, after baths and bedtime stories and a last-minute cookie snack, he tucked the girls into their shared room. As he reached the door to leave, Lily called out softly, "Daddy," he turned. "Can you tell us the story again? The one where you met Mommy?" He smiled and came back to sit on the edge of the bed. "Of course." As his voice filled the room and the girls' eyes drifted shut one by one, Jonathan told the story not as a tale of loss, but as the beginning of something rare. A love that had changed form, a love that had outlived absence, a love that had grown into three brave little girls, and the man who was lucky enough to become their father. And when the lights went out and the city glowed faintly beyond the window, Jonathan sat in the dark for a while, listening to their breathing. He didn't need fortune. He didn't need headlines. He had his story, and finally it had the ending it was always meant to have. In my view, the ending of this story is both deeply emotional and quietly powerful. It's not built on dramatic twists or grand reveals, but on the steady, transformative force of love, healing, and second chances. Jonathan's journey from a high-powered, emotionally detached CEO to a vulnerable, devoted father feels not only believable, but profoundly human. What makes the conclusion especially meaningful is that it doesn't erase the pain of the past. Elizabeth is still gone. Years were lost. Mistakes were made. And yet, out of that heartbreak, something beautiful and lasting is born. A family that should have always been, finally made whole. It's a reminder that redemption often comes not through perfection, but through presence. Jonathan doesn't just sign a paper. He shows up day after day for three little girls who never asked for a billionaire, only for a dad. And by giving them that, he finds the part of himself that no amount of success could ever buy. The ending isn't just happy, it's earned. And that's what makes it resonate.